So here we are then for the 6th episode of the mid-season review for all the teams competing in the 2014 Formula 1 World Championship. This one we're looking at McLaren, who have had a season where much better than last season, to admit, but not quite where they wanted so far. They retained Jenson Button, as they have done for the last few years, and this year they brought in a rookie driver, Kevin Magnussen, the son of former Formula 1 driver Jan Magnussen, who once raced for McLaren. It's been an interesting start to the season for McLaren. They have, obviously, at the first race in Australia, they had that brilliant double podium with Magnussen coming in second and Jenson coming in third. Wonderful drive from the both of them, but it appeared as if McLaren had seemed to have developed their car and hit the maximum potential of their car too soon, because as we ran over to Malaysia, the team had been caught up and Button managed to finish 6th in the end, just about holding off the Williams cars, and Magnussen finished in 9th place, a lap down, and that sort of began a sort of slump in a way for McLaren, because as we went into Bahrain, the first sign, and so far the only sign, of any reliability problems for McLaren is both cars retired with clutch problems after a quite decent grid qualifying. They both started 6th and 8th and were running quite well until that point, and it was a shame for Button and Magnussen because they were running quite well towards the end. As we moved further on into China, again the slump got worse. Well, in terms of performance, it got worse. Both cars finishing, but outside of the points. Button finishing 11th behind Kvyat and the Toro Rosso, and Magnussen finishing behind the other Toro Rosso, Verne. And it wasn't as if they'd qualified that well either. They've both qualified 12th and 15th respectively. They'd moved up, but they didn't really have the pace that they'd had initially after that great double podium in Australia, which was a shame, really. And Spain kind of reflected that, because although Button started 8th and got into Q3 after quite a good qualifying, the speed seemed to be in the car. They couldn't take that as a race pace, and they finished again both outside of the points in 11th and 12th, and it was a shame for McLaren because they brought updates that didn't really do the job for them. However, that form was quickly turned around despite a very tricky qualifying for Button in particular, who started 12th at Monaco. He managed to finish 6th, just behind Nico Hülkenberg in 5th place, and he couldn't get past Hülkenberg, but he definitely had the quicker car. Magnussen was able to finish 10th. He had a really tricky race. He was up and down, had problems. He had a couple of accidents during the race, but he managed to get a point in the end, which was a good result from McLaren. If not what they wanted, they maybe wanted a bit better. Well, they definitely wanted a bit better, but they couldn't quite make that. Canada was a sort of lucky result in a way for McLaren, because Button was only on for a 6th place until the crash between Felipe Massa and Sergio Perez took them both out, and Button was able to finish 4th because of that, and Magnussen also got into the points because of that, and he finished 9th in the end. But it was another double finish, and McLaren had shown signs of pace during the weekend, if not electric and able to keep up with the front 4 teams, but they were there or thereabouts. Austria, it was another tricky weekend for McLaren. Even though Magnussen had the pace and he ended up finishing 7th place, Button didn't have any pace, and that's been a bit of a theme for Button. He's either been quick or not quick. He's never had that medium so far this season, and it was a good and bad race in a way for McLaren, but some more points on the board for Magnussen showed maybe the form could be possibly getting better in those high-speed tracks, and it was certainly proven in Silverstone, where a very, very quick track, and Button was able to get 3rd place on the grid, admittedly due to the wet weather conditions and the mixed qualifying conditions. He was able to get 3rd, and he finished 4th, just 0.9 of a second behind that second podium of the season, which McLaren desperately wanted, behind Daniel Ricciardo, and it was unfortunate for Button not to get that podium. Magnussen as well, he had a good race. He came 7th after starting 5th. Both McLaren drivers having a good qualifying session, taking advantage of that wet weather. but both cars having a good race, and both seem to be on the pace with the top teams. Maybe not towards the end, maybe not towards the mid point of the race, where the McLaren sort of struggled, but definitely at the start and the end, they were definitely right there with them. We moved on to the German Grand Prix at 8th and 9th for McLaren. It was a shame, really. Magnussen had qualified 4th, but that collision with Massa at the start, which took Massa out of the race completely, pushed him all the way down to, I think, 19th place at some point. But he was able to fight through back to the field and finishing 9th. Good result for Magnussen. Button was able to finish 8th after qualifying in 11th, so that was a good race for McLaren, but they couldn't quite keep up with the Force India of Hulkenberg, which means their continuing battle carries on. It was a different sort of race for McLaren in Hungary, because although Jenson Button led the Grand Prix at one point, they messed up his tyre strategy, McLaren. They admitted to that. They were on the intermediates instead of the dries, and had they started on the dries on that safety car period, they could have ended up with a lot better for both drivers. 10th and 12th position could have easily been 5th and 7th for McLaren, but sadly they couldn't capitalise on that, and especially after Force India crashing out both cars. Shame for McLaren not to capitalise on that, but the progress is a lot better now for McLaren. Even though they sort of stall at some tracks and then make improvements, I do expect them to be competing closer to the front come towards the end of the season. They need a bit of luck to get into the podiums possibly, but at some tracks anyway. But I do believe that McLaren are getting a lot closer to that, another podium for the season. I think they will be fighting for it as well. Maybe not so much race wins, considering how far ahead that Mercedes are at the minute, but definitely watch out for them for podiums for the rest of the season.